Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Top Chinese and U.S. officials are set to meet in Alaska from Thursday to Friday, the first since President Biden took office. Senior Chinese diplomat Jiechi and also Wang would meet U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The meeting is key to set the tone for bilateral relations. Blinken said a wide range of issues will be discussed. White House press secretary also said the meeting would also cover and focus on climate change. How could the two sides, the world's two largest powers, be able to bridge their differences? The chances of cooperation? Let's loop in our strong panel. For more on China-U.S. cooperation on climate change, at least the possibility of it, joining us in New York, Jeffrey Sachs, professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development from Columbia University. Good to see you, sir. In Boston, Michael Medling, the deputy director of the Center for Energy and Environmental Policy Research at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. In Washington, D.C., Wu Changhua, executive director of the Professional Association for China's Environment. Last but not least, in Beijing, Ma Jun, director of the Institute for Public and Environmental Affairs and founder of the Blue Map app. Welcome to all of you. What a strong panel. I'm very excited about this discussion. Let's start from what China just experienced. Mr. Ma, particularly, tell me more about the challenge of sandstorms China is witnessing this week, and how is this going to help people understand better about the issue of climate change?
I hope that this can serve as a warning sign. You know, we better not to allow any crisis to pass without really reviewing the root causes. Mm-hmm. I think, but you know, on this, it's the what's the correlation between this and global warming? We have to seriously review that.
Right. Professor Sachs, for the United States, it's a different thing. $1.9 trillion US relief package has just been, in fact, approved. And how will this, in a way, help the administration to re-streamline the policies related to U.S. infrastructure building and many other things, including commitment to climate change? Tell me more about that.
President Biden has proposed a two-stage process for our budget. The $1.9 trillion that was just passed is really a rescue package or a relief package for the unemployed, for cities that have fallen behind in revenues, for getting the vaccination campaign expanded, for people who are really hurting. Yeah. It's not yet the next phase, which is the so-called recovery package, where President Biden will propose probably a roughly equal-sized package, around $2 trillion, though over a somewhat longer period of time, for investment, for investment in green recovery, for investment in renewable energy, smart grids, and other parts of the transformation to a zero-carbon economy. President Biden, thank goodness, is committed to decarbonize the U.S. economy. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, the American people, because we are suffering the same kinds of huge shocks, whether it's massive forest fires or floods or extreme hurricanes or heat waves, all of this instability is very much in the mind of the American people right now, and they want an answer for the longer term. President Biden's determined to give that answer. So the next package will be focused on the long-term structural change for a clean, green economy.
There seems to be a window of opportunity for both sides to really address it. Now we are looking at this week, huge agenda, China-U.S. strategic dialogue later this week. Are they going to have some common ground nailed down in terms of climate change?
There's no question that, you know, we saw this before the adoption of the Paris Agreement. Close cooperation of the United States and China was critical to get some other nations that were, let's say, potentially going to pursue their self-interest and not collaborate in the way they ended up collaborating, other major economies, it was really important to have China and the US pushing very hard. And I think we wouldn't have had the Paris Agreement without that alliance in 2015 and 2014. And so I think it'll be really important to have it again. The question for me is, will other topics in foreign policy, in trade policy, et cetera, where there are disagreements, take the upper hand and derail what I think is a desire to cooperate on those issues where there are common interests. And that's, I think, really what we have to see and hope for the best on.
Hope for the best. Is that also what you're thinking, Ms. Wu?
I think the two definitely will keep talking to each other, at least giving the world the impression that the two are not really totally against each other. And the bottom line is a shared challenge, and so we have to figure out how to work with each other. But in reality, I don't think the two will be able to find enough common ground to really work closely together, but rather we have to compete. And each of the countries probably have to invest in technology, innovation, industrial policy, and literally compete with each other. But, ideally moving towards the same direction, which is net zero carbon emissions by mid-century. That's the only hopeful thing, actually, we're looking for.
Okay. So it seems that the stage has been set. Let's discuss the juicy details. Professor Sachs, going to you. When we talk about climate change, that's a global aspiration to control it and to reduce the effect of it. However, what exactly can be in the discussion notebook between China and the United States when it comes to climate change? That probably is the real thing we need to work out now. To you, are there a list already of items?
I think the first point is for us to share the goals and a timeline so that by mid-century, we and the rest of the world, not just China and the United States, but Europe and the other regions of the world are going to decarbonize. This is what is needed for global safety. Actually, China and the U.S. Not only have a shared need for this and a shared need to work with the rest of the world, but both China and the United States are technology leaders that are going to play a big role in other parts of the world, for instance, in selling electric vehicles or in helping other parts of the world move to zero carbon energy. So I think that this is a worldwide effort where the two largest countries have a common need and a common interest. Of course, there will be some competition, but I actually think there will be cooperation in the end. Part of what is happening right now is a lot of tough talk coming from the United States and a lot of posturing. But actually, we have so many problems inside the United States that we have to heal. There's no place for real global conflict or instability. And I think that this is generally true around the world. We have so much work to do to make the planet safer, to stop this pandemic, to green the economy, to stop environmental destruction. It's a big challenge, and we really don't have time for Cold Wars or any other kind of conflict. So I'm a bit more optimistic. There's a lot of heated rhetoric. Half the United States is very ignorant of geography and reality and history anyway, so you have to give us time to get this right. But I think we can cooperate.
Mr. Macklin, to you, what is the thing on that list that can be termed as common ground, China-U.S., in terms of climate change, that they could bring it up this time in Alaska, probably, or if not having enough time, next time?
I shared Professor Sachs's optimism. I think ultimately the common interest in dealing with this problem, I mean, we have to remember, significant domestic political pressure from important constituencies, from the public at large, to deal with this issue. And we know we cannot do so unless the two largest emitters take a leadership role on this challenge. There are issues that are really difficult to do. I think, talking about carbon constraints, talking about policies that impose significant costs in certain sectors of the economy, those very quickly escalate protectionist debates, jobs, competitiveness, etc. But the whole area, and I think Professor Sachs already mentioned it, of research and development, of cooperating on technologies which can then spread and diffuse around the world to facilitate and accelerate decarbonization in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, etc., bringing down costs, but also leveraging opportunities for the Chinese economy and for the U.S. manufacturing sector to produce and sell these technologies. That's where I could see an early, coalescing of interests, of common ground.
I see. Interesting. You term technology as rather a common ground than a competition. Let me go to you, Professor Ma Jun. Mr. Ma, tell me more. What should be, from China's perspective, as an environmentalist yourself, what should be on that list that they can bring it up during Alaska meeting, or probably meetings follow up on specific issues?
Bilateral collaboration will be a bit challenging, to get started all over, very, very quickly. But at least the two countries, just like Professor Sachs has mentioned, and we should not try to, we should work together to facilitate the global climate governance. During the Trump administration, he did really obstruct, totally undermine the global governance. And in many meetings on specific issues like green trade policy and green finance, basically it was impossible for the rest of the countries to even talk about this because of the opposition from the U.S. side. I think that should first, totally change. The two countries
momentum
try
change,
to be,
right?
Very active participants in this process and lead the process.
Many of the industrialized countries are talking about 2050 as carbon neutrality to achieve. China, as one of the largest developing countries, have been talking about with utmost effort 2060, and now that is already a grand goal. So, Mr. Ma, if I could be a little bit specific, what does that look? Is it going to be a clashing point, or is it going to be a point that both sides can come to understand each other's positions better and therefore build up upon it on some concrete plans for both of them?
Yeah, we have to recognize in the current, dynamic, political dynamic in America and in China, there will be, potential conflict, or different opinions that we have to manage. This is because the U.S. has already, I think, committed to 2050, and China's carbon neutrality will come 10 years later. And last time when we had a discussion with Professor Sachs, he mentioned that China, he hoped that China could also go, carbon neutral by 2050, just like America and many other countries.
Since you talk about the Professor Sachs, I would like Professor Sachs to respond to that. Even though the U.S. has been committing to 2050, party politics changes in the U.S. sway the agenda about climate change so much. We have witnessed that already. So the U.S. also has a credibility issue in front of the world, also toward China, of course. So tell me more about how do you see the 2050, 2060 issue, the different timetable, and the U.S. credibility issue?
Let me say, first of all, that China announced something very important in recent days in addition to the 2060, and that is that it is going to stop building coal plants in the Belt and Road countries. So the Belt and Road Initiative is an extremely important and positive initiative of China to help many other countries to modernize infrastructure. And a lot of us had concern that as part of that, there were new coal plants going up. But China very rightly said that it's going to focus on renewable energy, on clean technology in the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a huge plus. When it comes to 2050 and 2060, I'm just a huge China optimist, because China does everything faster than anyone else and faster than anyone expects. So I believe that because of China's excellence in technology, the way that China has lowered costs in photovoltaics and in wind power, China's expertise in large distance transmission of power, China's leadership in the future electric vehicles. I think China's just going to come to do this faster than it seems right now. 2050 is realistic. Okay. So just put me down as an optimist that China's going to get there by mid-century because it's just mastering the key technologies: 5G, renewable energy, long-distance transmission, smart grids, electric vehicles, battery supply chains. These are the components of success, and China's going to be strong in all of them.
Okay. But what about the U.S. credibility issue?
Well, my country is half crazy. You have to understand that. We've been battling this issue for 30 years. You know, the U.S. grew up as a petrostate. We have powerful oil interests, powerful coal interests. Right. For a long time, of course, nobody knew or understood climate change. Once it became understood, we still had powerful lobbies. Companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron were so powerful politically that no one could talk to them. So they just said, we don't care, we want to make money. And this was true politically for a long time. But I think that this is over. These companies are shrinking now. Their political weight is shrinking. Okay. I think that reality is leaving this Republican Party oil lobby behind. Trump was kind of the last gasp of it. He tried very hard to make as much pollution as possible and to build as much oil, gas, coal, fracking as he could, but no one listened because it isn't bankable anymore. It just isn't profitable anymore. So I think that reality is catching up with the United States, which often takes a long time, but I think it's happening now.
Right. Mr. Meckling, U.S. also has been talking about the industrial policy. How will this likely to be new industrial policy have an impact on the U.S. Agenda, implementation of the agenda? And how will this help the U.S., from your perspective, sir, be able to understand where China is coming from in a way, and be able to communicate better in that sense, at least, if not cooperation? Mr. Meckling.
Well, generally, I think that sort of the disdain for industrial policy that was common, you know, some say part of the Washington consensus 10, 20 years ago, that's largely evaporated, I think. I'm German. You probably hear that I have an accent. And speaking of industrial policy, you know, it was Germany and some other European countries that invested very heavily in renewable energy technology. Right. It wandered to China, and China has become much, much better at producing it and at much lower cost and at much larger scale. But that was an example of industrial policy. And I think that that realization that the government, that state, you know, strategic investment in certain sectors and certain early technologies to advance them, that's been happening for the last century, and it will play a critical role also in dealing with climate change. And I think that the Biden plan on climate policy, on climate change, reflects that very, very actively. So strategic investment, a lot of R&D activities, looking, of course, also at the job side of things, but also looking at competition, at competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing in these sectors and how to strengthen that, which, as I hinted earlier, also has a risk there, because that brings back sort of this competition side, whereas I was sort of trying to emphasize that innovation and cooperation on innovation is really a gift to the whole world. And innovation cannot be undone. Even after an election where, let's say, potentially in 4 years or in 8 years, we get a swing again on the political side, the innovation is there. And that's, I think, what we've also seen in Texas and in other states. You know, once renewable energy technology becomes competitive, that's there to stay. So it's really, really important, I think.
So may I invite every one of you to give me a 40-second answer? I know it's so hard because it's such a complicated issue. Just what do you expect your side to do, and what do you think the other side should do? 40 seconds, every one of you. Let's start from Ms. Wu.
Just to put all the tough issues on the table, keep the conversation going, and trying to figure out to find a middle way.
Okay, and the question is how, right? Mr. Meckling, please.
Well, I would go back to what I said earlier and really sort of urge both sides to look at the common ground and the common interest, which is very evident, and it's so clear here. We cannot solve the problem without these two important actors working together, and have that sort of take precedence over the many, many other issues on which there are disagreements, in which there are narcissisms from each side. But I think ultimately, again, I really hope that the global interest of dealing with climate change can prevail here.
Mr. Ma?
I hope that both sides can recognize that the two countries there are many sectors and stakeholders are already been working together even during the Trump administration.
Right.
And all these major companies like Apple, Dell, like Microsoft, Levi's, Adidas, and even Amazon and Procter and Gamble. We work together to try to create standards for green supply chain. And on the finance side, the rising transparency in China also make it possible to rate the environmental credit for millions of factories. So there's a real possibility to create a global digital solution to really transform the global, manufacturing, sourcing, and investment, and ultimately consumption. So I hope the two sides can seize this opportunity.
Okay, last but not least, Professor Sachs.
Well, I think that it's quite clear that we're not going to succeed alone, and we're not going to succeed if there's a lot of tension. So I think the main goal, I hope, in this first meeting is lower the temperature, stay off Twitter in general, that would be my hope, and have a good, serious discussion. Two very important countries, serious people meeting, a lot of common ground that they can find, and I think it's time after years of craziness and instability to get back to seriousness, and that's what I'm hoping for and looking forward to in Alaska.
Jeffrey Sachs, Ma Jun, Michael Meckling, last but not least, Wu Changhua, thank you so much for your contribution to this very interesting discussion. Thank you, really appreciate it.